Boy, it's a good thing that they started calling the basketball tournament the Big Dance after Baylor had kind of broken ties with the Southern Baptist Convention, because we know that Baylor couldn't be dancing if that were still the connection. Well, excuse me. All right. Well, spring has sprung and it looks like it outside. I have some mighty big plans for this afternoon, but I got going a little bit late this morning. So here we are. We're going to be talking about the next beatitude on our list. Now, we've talked about 4 of them. My teachers used to describe the Beatitudes as like a flight of stairs. I've mentioned this before, but I think it bears repeating. The more times you hear it, the better chance there is that you're going to remember it for when you want to tell somebody about the Beatitudes. Every pronounced blessing leads a person toward the next pronounced blessing. See, once you've stepped on one stairs, you don't hop from up to 2 and then 4 and then 6. You go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You take those small steps. This progression leads us to experience true blessedness in life. As we move up the steps, we begin to experience that true blessing more and more each step we take. The first step, the poor in spirit, a person recognizes his own spiritual bankruptcy. It's like the old hymn writer wrote, "Nothing in my hand I bring, simply to thy cross I cling. None of me, all of thee, all of it is on God. God has taken care of it. I have nothing in my spiritual bank." The second, those who mourn are those who recognize that spiritual bankruptcy and they're sad about it. They're repentant. They want to do something about it. They look at their lives, they see the sin in their lives, and they don't like the sin. And those are the ones who are mourn. They're seeking ways to solve the empty space in their lives. The meek person commits himself or herself to the master, strong, full of spirit, but committed to the master. That's meek. Last week, I guess we talked about those who hunger for righteousness. Interestingly, the first 4 Beatitudes deal with the relationship between us and God. All right? That's a vertical relationship. After that, after the vertical relationship is established, then we talk about the horizontal relationships, the relationship between ourselves and other individuals. How do we live our lives in this world? So the vertical relationship lies at the foundation of a person's happiness. That's what the Bible teaches. It's what I believe. I think it's what lies at the foundation of my own happiness. That's my testimony in life. I am a blessed person. To me, that means that I'm happy and I am at peace and I am joyful about life, and it's all because of Jesus. Now, these next Beatitudes then deal with our relationship with other people. When our relationship with God is right, then our relationship with other people will follow. Our inward being is healed. Our inward being is healed when we get right with God, and it is blessed as we climb each step and grow in His grace. I'm constantly reminded of the Genesis story that introduces us to the entrance of sin into the world from the 3rd chapter of Genesis. I think it's written like a genius would write. Adam and Eve found themselves ashamed and fearful. They were internally broken for the first time in their lives. I don't know how long they had lived. That's not important. That's not important to the story. But the story goes, they were not ashamed, and then they were ashamed. Before, they were not ashamed. Last verse of Genesis 2. After they had committed this sin, this disobedience to God, they were ashamed. They were broken inside. Not only were they ashamed, but they were afraid. They were afraid for the first time. They were afraid of God. God had created them. God had breathed life into them. God had given them this garden, this Eden, this paradise in which they lived. And now they were afraid of God. Their personal relationship was broken. Adam said, that woman that you gave me. Can you imagine her response to that? I'd bet that it's not, that it wasn't a good one. But because the relationship with God was broken, their relationship was broken. The 10 Commandments. The first 4 commandments deal with the relationship with God. The last commandments are of the horizontal nature. They deal with the relationship of people to each other. Listen, there are no other gods beside me. You will have no other gods before me, beside me. It doesn't make any difference. No other gods. God is one. There's only one God. That's the teaching there. And God has spoken to these people, and he said, no gods beside me. Now, well do we understand that the great sin of Israel for centuries was the sin of idolatry. They were surrounded, had been surrounded by the Egyptians. Now they were going to go to Canaan, and they were going to find themselves surrounded by pagans and by religions which had many, many gods. They had been influenced in Egypt. Now they're going to go to Canaan, and those religions were different, but very, very much looked alike. Yeah. So, no other gods, no graven images. Don't want you to try to depict me in some kind of a statue that you can put away. These pagans had their god boxes. I've told you about those. I saw them for the first time I ever went to the Louvre in Paris, and I looked at those things and tried to figure out what they were, and finally decided to try to read the French. And I did take French in college for, I think maybe 2 years, and I can negotiate a few words. So I figured out that what they were these little boxes where they would put their gods. You remember the story of how Jacob and Leah and Rachel ran away, and how Dad came after them. Jacob. And here they were. He was coming after them, and he found his daughter, and she said she was not able to get up right then, but she had taken the God box full of all the gods. Yeah. Who could imagine? Well, do not take my name in vain. Remember the Sabbath to keep it holy. These are all commandments that have to do with our relationship with God. The other commandments deal with how we treat other people. Honor your parents. Do not murder. Do not commit adultery. Do not steal. Do not bear false witness in court. Do not covet. All of these have to do with our relationship with other people. If we love God, then we are able to love other people. And that's the way we begin. We begin by loving God. We grow stronger by loving other people. That brings us to the great commandment. Matthew himself tells a story in the 22nd chapter. It's one that's repeated also in Mark and in Luke. And I'll just read it to you. Probably be just as good that way. But when the Pharisees heard that he had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered together. These people are always wanting to test Jesus. They were always wanting to catch him in some kind of a slip-up so that they could go on CNN and tell everybody that he had made a mistake. Well, so here they are. They gathered together. Then one of them, a lawyer, asked him a question, testing him, saying, "Teacher, which is the great commandment in the law?" Now, I don't know what he expected. We don't know what that's all about. We don't even know exactly why he was asking that question, but it was a test. That's what Matthew tells us. He was testing Jesus. And Jesus said, "You will love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and great commandment." And the second, he didn't seem to pause, did he? He did not even seem to pause. And the second is like it. You will love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets. Well, that's where we find ourselves when we're looking at this pattern that runs throughout the Bible. It is the pattern of worshiping God, of trusting God, of loving God, of obeying God. And when we get that relationship with God put together right, then we are able to have relationships with other people. First, love God, get right with God, and next, get right with people. And real happiness, real joy, real peace comes when we follow these directions of the Lord that we find in the Beatitudes. These are the steps that we take. And here's the one that we're looking at today. Blessed are the merciful. Well, somehow this idea doesn't seem as revolutionary as the others that we've heard. So maybe it's a little bit easier for us to accept. But let me tell you something. When Jesus said it, he was not preaching to a culture that had grown up for 20 centuries of Christian preaching and practice. That was not the case as it is now. For all our failures and all our foibles and frustrations in 2021 America, the fact of the matter is that there remains concern for the poor and for the deprived, and that is a result of Christian teaching and Christian preaching through the ages. You can read the pages of history. You can do it yourself. You can do the research. Don't take my word for it. But alienatory institutions, charitable institutions, my daddy used to do that better than I did. Charitable institutions almost always have come as a result of the church, the institutional church, in fact, that many people disdain. I hear people all the time saying, "I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual," and I wonder what in the world they're talking about, but I have an idea that they just don't like what they perceive or what they think of as the institutional church. But that's for another discussion. The fact is that the church has had an influence on the way we think in Western culture. So for all of our angst and for all of our anger, we normally seek justice over vengeance, and we at least give lip service to striving for fairness and dealing with all people. But Jesus was preaching to Jews who had spent their lives under the tyranny of the religious elites, the religious legalism of the scribes and the Pharisees. If there were philosophical influences, they were most likely from the non-compassionate Stoics. They might offer help, but they did not offer compassion. And the Romans had no inclination for pity. They were brutal, and they were brutal beyond our understanding or beyond our belief. The Old Testament called for mercy at times. The Proverbs are rife with examples of that. Here's one: he who is slow to wrath has great understanding, but he who is impulsive exalts folly. Here's another: he who oppresses the poor reproaches his maker, but he who honors him has mercy on the needy. Another: a soft answer turns away wrath, but harsh words stir up anger. We have these familiar words in Micah, the 6th chapter of Micah. I say familiar, I think they're the most familiar that have to do with how we should act before God. And this is an Old Testament passage. Remember that. With what shall I come before the Lord and bow myself before the high God? Shall I come before him with burnt offerings, with calves a year old? Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams, 10,000 rivers of oil? Shall I give my firstborn for my transgression? Here's the answer to those questions. He has shown you, O man, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? But to do justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. Yeah, that's Old Testament teaching, much of which, while the prophets spoke out about justice and mercy, more often than not, the idolatry of the Israelites showed itself in grasping for riches and grasping for power, with its natural result of shoving aside the poor and the outcast. Jesus told a story that's recorded in the 16th chapter of Luke. This is toward the end of the chapter. So Jesus told him, there's a certain rich man. He was splendidly clothed in purple and fine linen and lived each day in luxury. At his gate lay a poor man named Lazarus, who was covered with sores. He lay there longing for scraps from the rich man's table. The dogs would come and lick his open sores. Finally, the poor man died. He was carried by the angels to sit beside Abraham at the heavenly banquet. The rich man also died and was buried. And he went to the place of the dead, and there, in torment, he saw Abraham in the far distance with Lazarus at his side. Now listen. This rich man did not beat Lazarus. He didn't hurt him in any way. He never took a whip to him. He never called the police to say, come get him. He didn't mock the beggar. He didn't try to run him off. He just ignored him. He just walked by him every day, just walked by him. There was no quality of mercy in him. You see, that's the problem. No mercy. There was not a lot of consideration of love and mercy from any quarter in the first century. Jesus called out the religious elites many, many times. Once he specifically termed them hypocrites for keeping all the minutiae, the little rules. They could do that. They could tithe, mint, cumin, whatever. They could account for every little penny while they ignored the really important things. Yeah. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, he said, hypocrites. This is Jesus talking. You pay tithe of mint and anise and cumin and have neglected the weightier matters of the law. justice, mercy, faith. These you should have done without leaving the others undone. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with keeping the rules. The rules are there for us to keep. But there are things that are far more important than the rules. You blind guides, you strain your water so that you won't accidentally swallow a gnat. Then you swallow a camel. I know I'm running out of time. I was afraid that I might, so some of this will have to wait. But I want us to let this beatitude be a lesson that we take to heart. Justice is important. Mercy is more important. Mercy takes no notice of small things, forgives big things. There's one other factor that I want us to consider. This is important. And this is the last thing that I want to say. It might take a little while, but it's the last thing I want to say because I think it's so important. When Jesus says, this is Matthew 7:2 in the NIV, he's talking about judging. And he said, don't judge that you be not judged, because he said, for in the same way that you judge others, you will be judged. And with the measure that you use, it will be measured to you. What do you think that means? It's really pretty plain, isn't it? We think about how we judge other people for what they are doing, or for who they are, or for what they are, or what they have become. My goodness. This is the way the New Living Translation says the same thing. You will be treated as you treat others. The standard that you use in judging is the standard by which you will be judged. Is that what you want, really? Do you want justice or do you want mercy in your life? Here's another one, Matthew 18. The kingdom of heaven can be compared to a king. This king decided to bring his accounts up to date with servants who had borrowed money from him. In the process, one of his debtors was brought in who owed him millions of dollars. Sounds like a lot. I like to tell people I can't even spell millions of dollars. He couldn't pay. Of course not. So the master ordered that he be sold, along with his wife, his children, and everything he owned. Why? To pay this debt. The man fell down before the master, and he pleaded with him, please be patient with me, and I will pay it all. Well, that wasn't the way it was going to happen, was it? The master did have pity on him. He released him, forgave the debt. What? He just said, I'll pay it all. Master knew he couldn't pay the debt. They just said, he looked at him, he saw this man, he saw how pitiful he was, he saw the wife, he saw the children, and he had mercy. He had mercy on him. He said, nah, it's not important. When the man left the king, listen to this. The man left the king. He went to a fellow servant who owed him a few $1,000s. He grabbed him by the throat. He demanded instant payment. And his fellow servant fell down in front of him. And he begged for a little more time. Be patient with me. Be patient with me, and I'll pay it, he pleaded. But this creditor wouldn't wait. He had the man arrested and put in prison. Well, some of the other servants saw it. They were very upset. They went to the king, and they told the king what had happened. The king called the man in that he had forgiven, and here's what he said. You evil servant. I forgave you that tremendous debt, millions of dollars, because you pleaded with me. Shouldn't you have mercy on your fellow servant just as I had mercy on you? Then the angry king sent the men to prison to be tortured until he had paid his entire debt. And then Jesus said this, that's what my heavenly Father will do to you if you refuse to forgive your brothers and sisters from your heart. That's the 18th chapter of Matthew. I want you to read those verses. Matthew 7, 1 and 2, Matthew 18, 23 to 35. I want you to read those passages and reflect on them this week. Think about God who in his mercy came into this world because he is a merciful God. And in his mercy, he died for your sin. Paul wrote, for God is so rich in mercy, and he loved us so much that even though we were dead because of our sins, he gave us life when he raised Christ from the dead. It is only by God's grace that you have been saved. And let's reflect on that too. I'll see you next time.